All right, guys. So today I want to talk to you about the Belt and Road Initiative and how this economic rivalry between the U.S. and China has within it a struggle between the US and Europe. And this struggle is one over independence because the Europeans want to be independent of American control. They want to really break the fetters of the American empire. And the United States, so far at least, wants to maintain its sphere of influence over the European continent. So I spent some time today reading up on China's Belt and Road Initiative, and basically what it is a giant international project in which China invests in big infrastructure projects. And the Belt and Road Initiative is supposed to be this economic road, so to speak, from Central Asia to Europe and also in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And China wants to finance infrastructure projects in these areas, in these continents, in these regions. So, for example, let's say Italy wants to build a highway. Italy goes to China and says, okay, we want to build this highway. China says, okay, we're going to send you a loan. And supposedly the Chinese government has allocated hundreds of billions of dollars for this investment project. The Americans are making their own counter to the Belt and Road Initiative. It is called the Build Back Better World Initiative. This is the counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And the Americans are saying that the problem with China's Belt and Road Initiative is that it has too many strings attached to it. So let's say you get a loan from China. China will then make you make an agreement that if you guys don't pay the loan back, then we can confiscate the property or take control of the project that we helped or that we built for you. And the United States is saying, hey, we can give you guys loans, but we're not going to do that to you, right? We're not going to try to exploit you. Now, everyone's talking about China, right? Everyone in America is talking about China. In America, the biggest enemy is China. I would say that people talk more against China than they do Russia. And I know that sounds weird because in almost every single big American action movie, the Russians, right? Russia plays a big role in being the bad guy in the American psyche. Not just America, but also in British films as well. James Bond movies have a lot of Russian villains. But really, currently, I have noticed, especially in America's right-wing sphere of the media, there is a lot of talk against the Chinese, right? The Chinese are the big bad enemies. And if you look at big right-wing figures like Stephen Bannon, he talks all the time about China, right? The word China is kind of like the sound that America's psychological motor makes when it's spinning like a hamster wheel. It's like China, 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 China. But when you actually look at China's military infrastructure, it's extremely inferior to NATO's military infrastructure, definitely inferior to America's military infrastructure, which really forms the backbone of NATO. China's economy, it may be really, really big. It may have a lot of money, but how much of that wealth is actually distributed to the society as a way to pay for labor? It's like America, the quality of life that America has is way better than the quality of life that China's society has. That's a different subject, though. People make a huge deal about China. I think it's very, very overly hyped. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about the other struggle that is happening within America's move against China's Belt and Road Initiative. So Europeans want to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. Europeans want to engage with China. In fact, I believe that so far, the only European country that has signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative is Italy. And the Germans are saying, and the French also, they are saying, China, we would like to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative and take loans from you, but we want to make sure that, there's no corruption, et cetera, et cetera. And the Americans are saying, hold up, Europeans. Why do you want to engage with China? We will provide you a much better alternative, a much better project. And they call it the Build Back Better World Initiative. It's kind of like a tongue twister. Build Back Better World Initiative. And the Europeans are saying, America, why do you want to control us? If we want to collaborate with the Chinese, we should have that right. And so the conflict between the U.S. and China is escalating into a conflict between the Europeans and the Americans. Because the Americans, and I think to the higher echelons of American power, what's more horrifying than China is really an independent Europe. It's an independent Germany. A Germany that'll give the bird to the Americans and then collaborate with the Russians. This is a huge fear that America has because Germany is one of the industrial powerhouses of the earth. And if Germany makes an alliance with Russia, that would be a Leviathan of a Frankenstein that America just does not want to deal with. So the Germans and the French are saying, well, what if we want to work with the Chinese? Who are you to tell us what to do? Again, this is not really about helping China's economy. This is about standing up to the American empire, and I don't say that in a positive way. It's about revolting against American power. This is what's happening. Not too long ago, the New York Times published an article about this, and I just want to read to you guys some excerpts from it. It's really fascinating. The New York Times interviewed the French finance minister, Mr. Le Maire, and it says here in this article, published by the New York Times, Europe's strategic priority, by contrast, is independence. So Europe's priority right now is not China. And I know they are probably Americans who will tell you that, like, oh, Europe is really worried about China. Germany is like, is concerned about the Chinese. Like, what's Germany going to do about China? Blah, blah, blah. But Europe's priority right now is independence from the United States. And this article quotes the French finance minister as saying, quote, which means to be able to build more capacities on defense, military might, to defend its own view on the fight against climate change, to defend its own economic interest, to have access to key technologies, and not be too dependent on American technologies. This is why I laugh so much at this idea of like one world government. American Christian, not just American Christians, but like Western conservatives, Western Christians have been talking about this one world government for God knows how long, decades at least. And I'm just thinking, how the hell is this possible when so many countries hate each other? How is this possible when so many freaking regions hate one another? How the hell are you going to have one world government? Well, it's by the iPhone, guys, technology. Facebook, Zuckerberg, they're watching everything. This is about one world government. But the Europeans have been recently, they have been talking about making their own cloud, their own technological apparatus as a way to compete against big American tech companies like Amazon. The Europeans want to rival with American tech, and they have the capacity to do it, especially when you have a country like Germany in Europe. Like, Germany has the capacity to really, really rival with the United States. And let's not forget World War II. What the hell was that about? The Panzer tank? Look how much the Panzer tank was a pain in the ass to the Americans. Europe has this ability. It has this capacity. And it's interesting that the French finance minister talks about how Europeans want to have the freedom to make decisions, to make policy regarding climate change without having to worry about what America thinks. It makes you wonder about that girl that everybody was talking about, that girl from Sweden. I forgot her name. Greta Thunberg or something. What was her name? I'm pretty sure it was Greta Thunberg, this psychopath. She looks like a female Damien. It makes you wonder what that really was about. Like, why did this girl out of nowhere become famous, and these big media outlets and figures were pushing her? She became famous overnight. She really wasn't saying anything distinct. She wasn't saying anything original or unique. She didn't say anything that Al Gore didn't think of first. I mean, what was so special about this girl? And I come to think of it, perhaps it's because the Europeans are using her as a way to make huge amounts of propaganda about climate change, so that the Europeans can then say, well, let's move away from what some American neocon thinks, and let's do what we want. Anyway, the biggest focus that I have in reading this article is Europe's obsession, or I shouldn't say obsession, but Europe's fixation on defense. They want to make a military machine that can rival with the American military machine. So the article goes on to say, the key question now for the European Union, he said, the finance minister said, is to become, quote, independent from the United States, able to defend its own interests, whether economic or strategic interests. And then, unquote. And then the article says, still, he added, the United States remains our closest partner, blah, blah, blah. They have to add that in there. Mr. Macron, according to this article, wants to see a greater American commitment to independent European defense ambitions that he says would be complementary to NATO. So they have to toe the line a little bit. They can't just say, we want to break away from America, although there has been some extreme language from the EU, especially from Jean-Claude Juncker, who was the president of the EU Commission. When he was the president of the EU Commission, he actually stated, I'm pretty sure in 2019, that that Europe must replace the United States. And that's probably the most extreme rhetoric that I have seen coming out of the EU. That, and also Merkel saying that she no longer really trusts in the United States for protection. And that was some pretty strong rhetoric, given the fact that it is known within the United States government that if Germany ever got the impression that they could not rely on American security, that they would pursue a nuclear armament. That's why I say that rhetoric is so dangerous. Because the last thing that we want is a nuclear-armed Germany. I think that would be scarier than Iran. Yeah, who wants to imagine the Fourth Reich with nuclear weapons? So the article goes on to say, asked if differences over China meant inevitable divergence between the United States and Europe, Mr. Le Maire said, quote, it could be if we are not cautious, unquote. But every effort should be made to avoid this, which means, quote, recognizing Europe as one of the three superpowers in the world for the 21st century, alongside the United States and China. So what we see taking place within this struggle between the U.S. and China is an internal struggle between the U.S. and Europe. The Europeans, it's just like Iran. It's very similar. I shouldn't say it's just like, but it's very similar to Iran. Iran is a country that America is worried about, that America wants to prevent from going nuclear, supposedly. And the Germans will, for decades actually, the Germans have been working with the Iranians to the ire of the Americans. And the Americans will say, why are you working with the Iranians? And the Germans will say, because we want to, because we want to do what we want to do. We want to have trade with the Iranians. And we want to, if Iran wants to have nuclear energy, then it should have the right to do so. And Americans will say, well, no, don't you know that Iran wants to use that nuclear material to make weapons? Germans basically say, okay, we don't really give a damn. and this has been going on as far back as the Clinton administration. But why does Germany sympathize with Iran? It's not that Germany really sympathizes with Iran. It's because Germany sees Iran being an enemy of the U.S. as a way to break free from American power. It's a way to rebel against the United States, just like the Germans rebelled against the Roman Empire. The Germans are rebelling against the American Empire. And so China is kind of like that. It's like, well, America hates China. America has a rivalry with China. So what are we going to do? We're going to engage with the Chinese, even though the Americans hate that. Now, there's another thing that's been taking place, and I'm currently working on an article on this, and it should be out maybe in a week, maybe even a week and a half, maybe even more. I don't know. I don't really have a set schedule for when I publish my articles. But if you look at the big tech industry within Germany and also within the European Union, there has been a decent amount of talk about reinvigorating Europe's military machine, about really advancing the defense industry of Europe, especially Germany. And this is really a way to rival with the United States. So a lot of things are happening, and there is this veneer that people will fixate themselves on, like China. But we have to look at the other thing that's taking place. Yes, there is a rivalry, an economic rivalry between the U.S. and China. But what does this also entail? It entails the Americans being very worried about the Europeans getting too close with the Chinese. Just like there is a great concern within the United States about NATO members getting too close to the Russians. And this is what the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is about. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is not just about natural gas. Let's be real here. It's not just about natural gas. It's about geopolitical strategy, but ultimately it's about political or I could say political advancements to fulfill a nation's interest. So in this case, Germany is working with the Russians, and they've actually already completed this. It just needs to be operational. But the Germans and the Russians have built this giant pipeline connecting Russia to Germany. And now, if this pipeline goes operational, which it very well likely will, the Germans can get natural gas directly from Russia. This scares the Americans because they're worried that Germany will get too close to Russia's sphere of influence, and you'll have another German-Russian alliance like you did during the Second World War. And the Ukrainians and the Poles have been very worried about this pipeline because for many, many, many years, the Poles and the Ukrainians have been making billions of dollars from transit payments. So every time Russia exports natural gas through Poland and Ukraine, Russia has to pay money to the Poles and the Ukrainians. And with this pipeline, the Russians can bypass the Ukrainians and the Poles. And with that, the Ukrainians don't really have much leverage. They can't say, well, you guys need us to export natural gas. The Ukrainians lose that leverage. They lose that point. And that weakens the position of Ukraine and Poland. So you have that taking place. You have that danger. And with a Poland that is weakened, that means that it can be more and more vulnerable to countries like Russia and Germany. History is repeating itself, is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, yeah, that's my video for today. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Hope you guys have learned something. This has been some theology. God bless.